You think you're seeing clearly, but what if your perception is just an elegant repetition of what you've always believed to be true? The mind loves to feel awake. It learns, interprets, connects ideas, and convinces you that it figured it all out. But deep down, something still feels stuck, a subtle stagnation, as if, despite all your awareness, life still refuses to truly change. And that's when a quiet doubt begins to rise. Is there something I'm still not seeing? But perhaps the more honest question is, am I truly observing or just reinforcing an old mental script? You were trained to think that observing is neutral, that it's enough to pay attention, to be present, to be aware. But there's an almost invisible detail. The way you observe is contaminated, not out of malice, but out of survival. There's an active filter between you and reality, a filter made of old fears, inherited judgments, and unprocessed emotions. And as long as it's there, the laws shaping your reality remain hidden. You don't see them because you're not observing from a free place. You're looking from the center of conditioning. That's why, even when you know what you want to change, you still feel trapped. Today, we'll expose what hides behind the most subtle act of consciousness, observation. Because maybe what you call reality is just a reflection of how you've learned to look. And only when this is seen, everything begins to reveal itself. The bias filter you mistake for awareness. There's something in your mind that filters everything you perceive, but you almost never perceive it. You wake up, live your day, search for answers, and feel like you're aware. But silently, there's a program running, deciding what you notice and what you ignore. Not because you chose it, but because your protection system decided that some truths are just too dangerous to be seen. This filter has a name, Reticular Activating System, or RAS. In practice, it acts like a doorman for your brain, only letting through what seems relevant to your emotional survival. And what is relevant? Whatever confirms your current view of the world, whatever sustains your identity, even if that identity is built on pain. You might say you're alert, awake, aware, but more often than not, you're just spinning inside a narrow field of perception, limited by past experiences, unintegrated fears, and beliefs you don't even remember adopting. This means that most of what you think you're observing was already chosen before you looked. And that's where the subtlest illusion begins. The mind believes it's seeing reality as it is. But in truth, it's just replaying whatever keeps your inner world safe. You want clarity, but your system fears what clarity might bring. Because real clarity often means facing parts of yourself that were hidden, letting go of certainties, allowing old versions of yourself to die. RAS protects you from that. It blocks anything that threatens the coherence of your emotional script, anything that pushes for true expansion, anything that demands surrender, detachment, inner rebuilding. And then comes the paradox. You seek growth, but only see what keeps you stuck. This selectivity isn't conscious. It happens silently all the time. And that's why patterns repeat. Not because you didn't learn, but because you're still observing through the same lens. As long as this filter is active, the new will remain invisible. Change will seem out of reach, and reality will keep responding to your current version, even if it's already collapsing from within. But there's something even deeper that must be revealed, because this filter isn't just a brain mechanism, it's the manifestation of an older, subtler internal force, a silent observer shaped by trauma and the need for control, a hidden self that looks for you and distorts everything that could set you free. And it's this observer we'll talk about next, because maybe the awareness you believe you have was never truly yours. The inner observer is not you, it's your survival complex. There's a deep, almost universal misunderstanding. The belief that the thing observing inside you is pure, neutral, trustworthy, as if the simple act of being conscious were enough to see with clarity. But what if your inner observer isn't really you? What if the gaze that feels so lucid is just the version of your mind that learned to survive? What we call consciousness is often just a conditioned reflection, an inner archetype shaped by everything you've had to control, predict, avoid. This gaze you use to perceive the world and yourself may be guided by old traumas that still haven't been digested. From an early age, you learn to observe your environment as a means of protection. You learn to spot risks, anticipate rejection, foresee conflict. Your nervous system organized itself around that. And without realizing it, that watchful gaze, that emotional scanner, became your main lens of perception. That's why, even in silence, you feel tension. Even in peace, something watches with caution, as if something is always about to go wrong. That observer is not your authentic self. It is the observer complex, an emotional AI built to ensure you don't suffer the same way again. But the cost is high. You don't see what's here now. You see what your past is afraid might happen again. It's like an emotional echo running in the background, a déjà vu of the soul, where every new experience is filtered through old wounds. And so, the present is never truly new. It's just a re-edited replay of what once hurt you. This conditioned observer feeds on vigilance. It wants certainty. It wants control. And when you try to expand, it whispers, "Careful, this went wrong before." You feel like you're conscious, but in truth, you're on alert. And alertness is not presence. Alertness is unresolved memory trying to prevent collapse. Maybe you've lived this before. A situation that looked completely new, yet inside, it felt like something ancient was happening all over again. You feel like you've been here, but you haven't. What's repeating isn't life. It's the lens you're using to see it. That's the power of the observer complex. It disguises itself as wisdom, but it's frozen in emotional survival responses. And as long as it's in charge of your perception, there's no room for the new, because it only recognizes what it can control. And what it can control is never what can heal you. True awareness begins when you realize you are not that gaze. You are not the vigilance. You are not the tension scanning everything for safety. You are the space that can observe the observer, the silent witness behind the lens, the point of presence that can choose not to react. But that takes courage, because letting go of the conditioned observer is letting go of false protection. It's accepting that the one who's been seeing is your trauma. And only when this is seen, something begins to dissolve. The lens begins to crack. And for the first time, you can look without the fear of seeing. But the world out there will still look the same. That's why, in the next step, we'll explore a disquieting truth. Maybe what you call reality isn't even out there. Maybe it's just a projection of what your psyche still refuses to resolve. Perception as projection. Reality isn't what's out there. Look around you. Everything seems solid, separate, independent of your will. But what if what you're seeing isn't what's out there, but what's still vibrating inside? There's an idea that's hard to accept, but impossible to ignore once it starts to reveal itself. The reality you live may simply be a reflection of what your psyche is still trying to resolve. It's not magic nor naive positivity. It's structure. It's emotional vibration collapsing the world into specific patterns. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And what we call reality is often nothing more than the unconscious, with form, color, and sound. What you refuse to see within returns to you from the outside, not as punishment, but as a mirror. Life isn't attacking you. It's trying to show you events, patterns, people, all arranged with almost cruel precision, yet profound compassion. Imagine a foggy mirror. You face it every day, but everything appears distorted. And when you try to wipe the surface clean, you realize the fog isn't on the glass, it's in your eyes. That's what perception does. It projects your inner condition as an external stage. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. Or better yet, what you vibrate, what still pulses unresolved within you. And even when you have rational clarity, if your body still holds fear, guilt, anger, that's what will be projected. Because reality doesn't respond to words. It responds to your state. Perception creates the field, attention sustains the field, and your emotional frequency informs that field at all times. That's why sometimes you change cities, relationships, paths, and everything ends up feeling the same. Because the point of origin hasn't changed. The lens is still running the same program. Nothing outside will align with you, while your inner observer is still at war with what you feel. And that demands a radical shift, to stop trying to control the world and start investigating what in you is using the world as an escape or a justification. Everything that is avoided turns into scenery. Everything that is repressed becomes an event. Reality offers itself as a mirror, not a sentence. And that revelation isn't comfortable. It shifts the blame, but also strips away the excuses. Because if the world reflects what you refuse to see, then the power to change isn't in what happens. It's in how you observe what happens. And now I want to invite you to pause. Close your eyes. Not now, but after this video. And sincerely ask yourself, what in my external life is trying to show me something I don't want to feel? If that question stirred something in you, if something clicked silently while you listened, like this video, not for the algorithm, but as a gesture of presence. And in the comments, write one simple but powerful sentence. I accept to see what lives in me. That act, small as it may seem, is already a break from the old observer, because it's in the recognition that projection begins to lose its grip. It's in that moment that perception stops repeating and begins to liberate. But there's another, even more hidden layer to this process. Behind what you perceive and what you ignore, there are laws. Laws that govern your experience like a spiritual algorithm. They are neither random nor unfair. They are simply obeying your focus, your vibration, and what you've silently chosen to see. And it's about these hidden laws that we'll talk next. Hidden laws behind what you notice and what you ignore. You believe you notice what's important, but what if what you notice and what you ignore is being guided by invisible laws, operating even when you don't believe in them? Reality, contrary to how it appears, is not a random sequence of events. It is shaped by subtle principles, fields of resonance, and quantum movements that respond to your frequency, not your logic. In quantum physics, there's a phenomenon called wave function collapse. It tells us that until it's observed, the world exists in a state of potential, floating possibilities. But the act of observation turns the possible into the real. It's the presence of the observer that defines what becomes material. But this observation isn't neutral. It carries intention, fear, expectation, memory. And that's exactly what the universe responds to. You don't live what you want. You live what your vibration and your attention sustain. Everything you constantly see is in resonance with some part of you, even if you hate it, even if you say you don't understand why it keeps coming back. That's the law of frequency. You tune into what's inside. Reality simply responds. There's also the law of focus. What you feed with attention expands, even if it's a problem, even if it's pain. Attention is like light. Wherever it shines, reality organizes itself. And what you don't look at fades. That's the source of synchronicities. You think about something, and soon after you see signs, repetitions, encounters. It's not coincidence. It's the field responding to your vibrational presence. With a precision the rational mind could never explain. But there's more. Many of these laws don't operate just to help you. They also challenge you. They expose what you still unconsciously vibrate. That's why life seems to poke you with situations you swore you'd already outgrown. You think, why is this happening again? But the more sincere question would be, what in me still aligns with what I'm seeing? You notice certain things while she and others pass unnoticed. That's not random. It's energetic filtering. The whole field is vibrating, but you only pick up what you can sustain internally. In 2004, a study known as the invisible gorilla demonstrated that people focused on a task failed to notice something as absurd as a man in a gorilla suit walking across the scene. What does that prove? that the mind, when conditioned, ignores the obvious. That perception is not a mirror of reality. It's an unconscious choice filtered by laws that respond to your internal state. And here lies the key. You can learn to observe these laws, not to control them, but to cooperate with them. It's not about manipulating reality. It's about aligning your perception with the intelligence already at work. Because when you change what you vibrate, you change what you notice. And when you change what you notice, you change what you live. But there's a paradox in all this. Even knowing these laws, even accessing states of clarity, why do you still find yourself repeating the same patterns? Why do certain insights seem to slip away? Why does what's true escape, while what hurts still lingers? The answer lies in the next step. Because some observations stick with you, and others vanish. And that has everything to do with how your emotional system deals with what it sees. In the next chapter, we'll expose why the mind insists on repeating what wounds and rejects what heals. You'll understand why certain patterns stay alive, even after so much awareness. Why the wrong observations repeat and the right ones don't stick. Have you ever had a deep revelation, a moment of clarity that felt like it could change everything? But days later, it was as if nothing had really changed. It's more common than you think. The truth arrives. You feel it. You understand. But somehow you return to the same place, the same reaction, the same emptiness. Why does this happen? Why do the perceptions that could heal seem to vanish, while the old triggers take root with full force? The answer lies in the hidden workings of the mind, more specifically, in your silent alliance with familiar suffering. The mind is built to protect, not to liberate, and part of that protection comes through repetition. It prefers a painful but familiar pattern over a leap in consciousness that would require the collapse of what you've long called me. Every true perception is a threat to the ego structure, because seeing something new, something real, means letting go of the version of yourself you've upheld for so long, into the conditioned psyche that's interpreted as danger, as symbolic death. The mind wants coherence. It wants everything to fit within what's already been lived. And when an insight comes that doesn't fit, it gets rejected, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. That's why you can see clearly during a retreat, a meditation, a deep conversation. But later, back in your usual emotional routine, that vision disappears as if it never existed. It's the defense system reactivating the cycle. There's also a mechanism called cognitive dissonance. It's triggered when a new perception clashes with old beliefs. And guess which one wins? The old belief, because it has history, repetition, stored emotion. So the pain repeats, the pattern returns, the toxic thought reinstalls itself. Not because you failed, but because internally, there's still an invisible loyalty to what shaped you. A kind of silent allegiance to the pain that taught you how to survive. And while that loyalty isn't dissolved with compassion, any new perception will be treated as a threat. The mind will discard it before it has the chance to take root. That's why real change doesn't come from understanding. It only happens when the body and emotional field allow the new to feel safe, when clarity no longer needs to be fought. Until then, old patterns will remain the only ones with permission to repeat, because your system still recognizes them as part of who you are. But here comes a crucial point. There is a way of observing that doesn't trigger the internal alarm, a way of seeing that embraces rather than confronts, a way to witness what hurts, and by doing so, transmute it. And that's what we'll talk about now. Because when observation changes, everything changes. What was once a reaction becomes alchemy. What was once a prison becomes a portal. In the next step, we'll dive into the practice of observation as inner alchemy. You'll learn to see from a place where nothing needs to be rejected, only revealed. And in that space, healing is no longer an effort. It becomes the natural consequence of the way you see. Observation as inner alchemy, how to see what heals you. There is a form of transformation that doesn't require effort, struggle, or formulas. It happens in silence. In the very moment you stop trying to fix what you feel, and begin to observe it with presence. True inner alchemy doesn't happen when you eliminate pain. It happens when you're able to look at it without fear, without judgment, without the intention to get rid of it. Because what heals is never what you force. It's what you hold in awareness. The mind is conditioned to react. Something arises, you analyze, judge, try to understand, resolve, escape. But there is another way, an ancient, forgotten, subtle path, the path of witnessing. Not with the mind that interprets, but with the presence that embraces. What you observe with acceptance begins to shift in frequency. Because the emotional field no longer resists. What was once tension begins to melt. What once seemed like an inner enemy reveals itself as a forgotten part of you, waiting to be seen with compassion. This is where perception becomes alchemy. The observer becomes a channel. Presence becomes transmutation. Imagine an alchemist before raw metal. He doesn't reject it. He doesn't force it to become gold. He applies heat, holds the fire, respects the time of transformation, and the metal on its own reveals its hidden nature. It's the same with your pain. You don't need to heal yourself. You just need to learn to see. See what hurts, see what returns, see what never left, but see it with a new quality of vision, a gaze that doesn't want to change. It wants to understand. That is the observation that heals. Not because it solves everything instantly, but because it shifts the vibration of the field. And where there was resistance, now there is space. And where there is space, the new can enter. That's why certain insights only arrive after deep moments of acceptance. It's as if life says, now that you've stopped fighting, I can show you. You become a vessel for the real, and the real never wounds. What wounds is the attempt to defend yourself from what you feel. And maybe now you'll realize you were never trapped by reality. You were trapped by the way you observed it, by the constant effort to avoid what was inevitable to feel. The key was never to change the world, it was to change your gaze. And you can start with something simple. Close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself with silent honesty, what inside me have I most avoided looking at? This question doesn't demand an immediate answer. It only asks for presence, because what is observed with love begins to dissolve, without you needing to do anything but witness. True alchemy happens when what was once shadow is recognized as part. When what was once a struggle becomes listening, and when what you most avoided feeling becomes the point of liberation. You don't need to chase healing. It already lives in your field, waiting for you to simply see without running, without needing to understand. Just see. And then what once felt like pain becomes light, becomes flow, becomes presence. Because the gold was always there, hidden in what you didn't want to look at. We've reached the end of our journey, and maybe now, you're no longer the same person who hit play at the start of this video. You've walked through an invisible territory, the place where reality isn't shaped by facts, but by the way you observe them. You've seen that what seemed like reality may be just repetition, that the pain which repeats itself isn't punishing you, it's asking to be seen with new eyes, and that the observer within you, long mistaken for awareness, might just be the echo of a self that learned to survive, not to live. Reality was never against you. It was simply responding to what you, in silence, kept choosing to hold. What you notice and what you ignore is not random. It's vibration, it's focus, it's the exact reflection of what still pulses inside. And the real shift begins when you realize that you don't need to change everything around you. You just need to see from a different place. A place where your gaze doesn't come from fear, from lack, from defense, but from presence. From that point on, everything changes. Because what you call reality stops being a foggy mirror and starts becoming a living field of feedback and reconnection. You can keep searching for answers out there, or you can begin to observe, truly observe, what's alive in you right now. The tension, the silence, the repetition, the urge to escape. All of it is messaging, pieces of the same code. And when you stop, listen, observe with surrender, the laws begin to reveal themselves, not as formulas, but as truths that were hidden by the way you chose to see. Perception can be a prison, but it can also be a portal. It all depends on the internal point from which you choose to look. So now I invite you to take this silence with you, not as an ending, but as the beginning of another journey. A journey where every experience stops being an obstacle and becomes a mirror. And if this journey touched you in any way, I want you to tell me, so we know you were here until the very last second. Write in the comments. I am the observer, and now I see. That small gesture is an anchor, a silent testimony that something in you has awakened.